So for the grand finals, we have Transcendence on the government side and Epic on the opposition side. Let's give both a round of applause. Motion for the grand finals is this House celebrates the United States withdrawal from Trans-Pacific Partnership. So with no further ado, we'll be commencing the grand finals, and would like to invite the Prime Minister to open the debate.
May I begin? The great South Korean economist Ha-Jun Chang once said that the assertion that free market economics will pay everyone fairly and correctly is a myth. Thai government today wholeheartedly agrees that an economic market without state regulation only favors the financial elite and compromises the vulnerable whom we are meant to protect. It is on that note that we celebrate the United States withdrawal from the TPP. And before we move on further, we'd like to define some key terms in this debate today. Firstly, the TPP is a free trade agreement between the United States and 11 other nations in the Asia-Pacific and Americas region. The TPP establishes a free trade zone between these nations, which involves removing trade barriers such as import tariffs, eliminating protectionism for local industries, and enforcing broad regulatory standards that all signatories must abide by. And next, this House in today's debate will be the United States, and thereby Thai government will evaluate the impact of the TPP withdrawal from the perspective of the United States. Our stance and burden of proof is that the ratification of TPP harms the economic, political, and social landscape of the United States, and thus the prevention of those harms by withdrawing from the agreement should be celebrated. Our first argument is that the TPP discriminates the working class, and we have two levels of analysis. Firstly, the TPP leads to a large-scale loss of jobs in the manufacturing industry, which is the bread and butter for the low-skilled working class. As the TPP removes trade barriers and makes it cheaper to export products to the developing world, profit-oriented U.S. conglomerates will outsource the mass production of that product to those countries to minimize transportation costs. They also do this because the labor costs in developing countries is cheaper than the United States, and the TPP removes any barriers for our foreign U.S. companies to set up and shop in their land. This renders American labor forces to be comparatively cost, and it pushes the supply chain to move from the United States to countries like Mexico or Vietnam. As a result, millions of Americans lose their jobs and their ways of life. It makes matters worse when the increasing number of FTAs undertaken by the United States in the past few decades came to the same results. According to CNN, 5.5 million people and manufacturing jobs have disappeared from the United States within 2000 and 2008, and 16% of Americans have lost manufacturing jobs between 1960 and 2000. The Economic Policy Institute reports that after the signing of NAFTA, around 61% of high-paying manufacturing jobs were moved from the United States to Mexico, causing roughly 683,000 people to lose their jobs between 1994 and 2000. We cannot afford to make matters worse. Secondly, the TPP worsens social inequality. The profits of free trade are centralized to the hands of large MNCs at the expense of the rest of our society. No, thank you. In the United States, top 1% in Washington reports that the per capita salaries of American workers grew by around 0.4% per year between 1973 and 2000. And no, thank you, and have remained stagnant since the year 2000. In contrast, the salaries of American CEOs have increased by 10 times since the 1970s. When the rich become richer, the use of their economic power to depress the wages of its workers increases. Now with the option, though, thank you, of comparatively lower wages offered to foreign workers, the incomes of American labor would deflate in order to compete for the same jobs. This entirely defeats the purpose of state chasing economic growth. We seek profits from trade free trade exports, as we expect that the increase in demand will translate to more job opportunities that will put more disposable income in the hands of our people. With the TPP, the greater wealth reaped from our exports is concentrated at the top without trickling down to the people. No, thank you. The purpose of high GDP is meant to signal the growth of average income and purchasing power of every citizen, but social inequality means our economic growth does not actually increase the standard of living for our citizens. Economic growth per se is not a benefit in today's debate when we have proven to you that it is, no thank you, when we have proven to you that its growth discriminates the people. Our second argument is that the TPP forces a state surrender of policy-making powers. Two levels of analysis. Firstly, the TPP imposes a devastating investor-state dispute clause which allows corporations to interfere with the state's ability to make public policies. The agreement is a capitalist concussion which protects a corporation's right to profit in a free trade environment over the state's mandate to protect public interest. Therefore, when the state limits the rights of corporations in favor of social justice, they can be deemed to be in violation of TPP, which mandates a repeal of the law or a continuous compensation in billions of dollars for however long these policies remain in place. Case in point is when renowned tobacco company Philip Morris sued the Australian government for implementing plain packaging laws to drive down cigarette consumption for the sake of public health. Philip Morris used a similar clause included in the FTA between Australia and Hong Kong to enable them to have legal standing to protect their profit at the expenses of the democratic road. Thus, a ratification of TPP signals a loss of state ability to govern according to public interest, which means that they lose the social mandate that gives them the legitimacy to govern. Secondly, the TPP mandates a one-size-fits-for-all approach that streamlines the collective policy need of all participating nations without regard to unique political climate of each nation. Particularly in the United States, where the loss of jobs has led to a rise of right-wing populist sentiments fueled by the anger of the working class, having no ability to make adjustments to the TPP will lead to organized resistance against the state governments. As it stands, the anti-establishment sentiments of the working class in manufacturing states that have suffered from tremendous loss of jobs in Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania ended up becoming swing states that elected the anti-establishment Donald Trump in power as a form of retaliation against state failure. The ability to make policy adjustments based upon social will and current economic conditions should be a power that the state retains at all times. As it is impossible to cater to the unique economic demands of every nation, every party in the TPP is expected to concede to the same objective requirement of eliminating trade barriers. The significant economic harm there is that forcing every nation to succumb to a uniform standard is not fit for every nation making equal economic sacrifices. Under the TPP negotiations, the United States requests to continue protecting American rice exports and to gradually eliminate tariffs on import cars over a period of 30 years in order to avoid a market shock to the automobile industry were both firmly and rejected by TPP nations, and that is why we're proud to propose. Thank you.
Right, we thank the Prime Minister. To open the case of the opposition side, we'd like to invite leader of the opposition.
Article 2, we say that responsible country, responsible government pursues better opportunity, pursues the overall increasing of money inside the country, and then let the policy, and then let the redistribution to happen. That is what side opposition is standing for in this debate. Before moving on to our team's case, I'd like to first of all rebut the several points made by the previous speaker. Now, first of all, they discussed about the outsource of jobs and how it causes those middle-class people or lower-class people to have harm. But first of all, we say that even without TPP, we say that like outsourcing of jobs wasn't happening inside US because it is just a characteristic of US that they have high money to actually have people work, and therefore we think that that is not the problem of TPP itself. But secondly, furthermore, we say that government has a motivation to redistribute the wealth back, which I'm going to further elaborate in my argument. And thirdly, even if the redistribution is not done in the status quo, we say that when the pie becomes bigger, even the lowest class people also have their life quality upgraded, and we think that that is a benefit. And secondly, they discussed about how we can subsidize necessary services if you're in TPP. But first of all, we say that if you have more consuming power in the first place, if the people have more money, you have the ability to pay for the service provided by the state, even if it's kind of expensive in some cases. But secondly, furthermore, we say that FTA doesn't prevent the state from subsidizing their own product in the first place, but is subsidizing like overly providing money and overly subsidizing excessive protectionist policy, and we say that that is justifiable. Now, having read that, I'd like to move on to our team's case. First argument is about the harm to the U.S. economy. Free trade provides many opportunities for the U.S. to profit. TPP will make the price of the USA product cheaper, which means that USA companies will win over in the competition with other nations, right? And why is this? Because firstly, the TPP will lead to the removal of trade barriers, obviously, such as import tax, which means that US companies will be able to sell more of its goods at a cheaper price in other markets and compete better. TPP includes 12 countries, as they have already told you, which accounts for 2/5 of the world economy, to re-mention 40% of the world's economy. Low tariff of these nations will be a huge benefit for the US export industry. Secondly, countries like Malaysia and Vietnam will be an important part of the supply chain of the US, which makes the price product to go down. And a car in US, for example, is not fully developed and fully made in US because, like the gears or some part of the car, are actually made from another country and is actually imported from those kind of countries. And we see that that is actually very important for US because it lowers the price of the products produced in US, which increases their competitiveness. Thirdly, TPP enforces strong intellectual property rights over the member countries. States like Vietnam and Malaysia, in lots of cases, illegally copied USA products like films or drama without any compensation or without any payment to the adequate amount of money to the US corporation. Strong intellectual property laws will be beneficial for the service industry of the USA. That is why, according to New York Times, TPP would increase real income by $131 billion, or 0.5% of GDP a year, which we think is a significant benefit that we cannot deny. The biggest problem of the government policy is that other countries are also trying to have FTA without the US. According to the Council of Economic Advisors, in the absence of TPP, countries have already made it clear that they will actually form another FTA and they will move forward in negotiating their own trade agreement that excludes US, right? This agreement would improve market access and trading opportunities for all the other member nations and all the members that are involved in that type of FTA except for US, and USA should face those type of trade barriers. And we think that that is a significant disadvantage going to the US economy. For instance, a bilateral agreement between Australia and Japan, it actually gave Australia beef exporters a price advantage over the American products. And in this case, like those tariffs would ultimately have been removed under the Pacific Agreement when like TPP and when FTA was done. And this actually cost USA beef industry about $4,000 a day. We think that this is a significant benefit that we should actually pursue. So moving on to our team's second argument about the harms to the USA citizens. Something that you need to understand is that one of the main exports of the TPP for the United States is their technological products, right? With the TPP, there would be more iPhones, more high-tech products sold in the international scale without those barriers, without the trade barriers. Withdrawing from the TPP would produce many harms for the US citizens. Now, first of all, losing high technology jobs due to high tariff and less supply chain will harm the revenue of the US. Corporate income tax is the second biggest revenue source of the U.S. federal government. According to the Tax Policy Center, U.S. corporate income tax was $273 billion in 2013 and $320 billion in 2014. With less corporate profit, we say that tax revenues will fall. The impact of this argument is that it will severely harm the ability of government to use their money and utilize their money in beneficial and in the most important and crucial ways. For example, like education, healthcare, or like infrastructure, helping the old people, elderly people, and we think that there are a lack of money to use the money in those kind of aspects, which are the government's roles, which are the roles of the government that they should fulfill, and we think that this is a significant harm. And some people say that these benefits of trading and TPP are only concentrated to people in high classes, but we think that is not true because, first of all, government plans to actually expand trade adjustment assistance to distribute the benefit of FTA to lower-skilled citizens. For example, TAA, which was about to be done, trade adjustment assistance. And secondly, furthermore, we say that this can provide those types of free training programs and wage insurance for those types of people, and we think that that can be a best way to distribute the wealth to the poor. And lastly, high-skilled jobs create jobs for the poor too. If the government can guarantee higher welfare and more guaranteed payments, we think that everybody will have a better quality of life, increased quality of life. That's the world that side opposition support. Thank you.
All right, during the previous, we'd like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister to respond.
Can I begin? Mr. Madam Speaker, we think that the best form of redistribution that they keep on claiming is to provide people with more jobs. So in the end of the day, we think giving direct capital and whichever teams produces that the best in the end of today's debate, we think can take this debate home. Because we think that as of now, everything they say, like TAA or whatsoever, has been ineffective, right? We have used like $900 million on TAA, but it actually didn't bring any new jobs through education. But we think that actually TAA is an ineffective policy that spends too much money to begin with. So we think that directly giving and providing people with jobs through manufacturing and whatsoever is the best solution in this debate today. So let me directly move on to responses that we have to the previous speaker. The first speaker has been keep on emphasizing on the fact that the overall increase of money will help people redistribute. But first of all, Mr. Madam Speaker, we told you this is not true, right? Because we told you that first of all, the top 1% of people have 35% of the entire nation's wealth. But we told you also that through 7 years pastly, we heard the US GDP was increased by 2% annually, but the median household real income decreased by 1% annually. So in other words, even with the increase of the actual GDP, the poor people don't actually get more money virtually. So in the end of today's debate, we actually help more redistribution by giving them more jobs. Directly responding to other points, they have been talking about why outsourcing hasn't happened, what's characteristics of the United States, and whatsoever, which I'm going to explain later on. But additionally, the previous speaker has been talking about why FTA does not prevent subsidies. Mr. Madam Speaker, we're going to deny this characteristic because we believe that FTA inherently, you're simply not allowed to do anything that government does to interfere with the FTA and free trade to begin with, which this includes subsidy to begin with. So in other words, subsidies are not allowed in FTA, so that point is also flawed. Additionally, moving on to the other points to talk about how this makes US products cheaper, etc. First of all, Mr. Madam Speaker, even if prices are so much cheaper, if people don't have capital to begin with because they lose jobs, they can't even buy the cheaper products to begin with, right? Additionally, we're going to deny the assumption that labor costs are higher in the United States to begin with, right? Hyundai, Honda, and Nissan moved factories to the United States recently for a reason, because they don't see the merit in cheaper labor prices anymore, because the social trend is that United States labor cost isn't as expensive to begin with, right? So we think that under these cases, we can still have factories in the United States and still have cheaper products at the same time in the end of today's debate. Additionally, we think that the difference between the gap can only be solved by our policy, because when we give them direct jobs or whatsoever, they can actually afford the cheaper products and whatsoever. So all the benefits that they have and keep on talking about are contingent upon the fact that labor is cheaper in other countries and there's no tariffs, but we also have that, right? So we provide more jobs, and at the same time, we make sure that we actually have a better economy. Additionally, the previous speaker has been talking about why countries are not willing to negotiate and do free trade with the United States. But firstly, US has one of the biggest import markets in the world, and they have no choice but to abide by those standards. So even Honda and Hyundai, like we told you, is willing to create factories that will benefit American workers. But additionally, even if that is the case, more trade does not have meaning because it does not trickle down to the nearest people to begin with, right? Additionally, we keep on talking about in their second argument on issues why it will harm the revenue of the government and whatsoever, etc. But firstly, the increased domestic market can supplement losses that the companies make, because more jobs mean less government spending and more tax paid by the citizens. The reason why we think citizen tax is better than corporate tax under their logic is because corporations always have the incentive to evade tax and are not credible in doing so. So we think that directly collecting money from citizens is the most effective way to increase tax revenue of the government, and that's why we take this clash as home as well. And now that we told you what we're trying to send this debate today and why why they have all the benefits, we're going to relate to their last point on the issue of why only we have redistribution. First of all, TAA, if it has worked until now, we think that through the education, people would have actually gotten jobs that would have helped them, right? But as we see in the status quo, TAA did not actually give more people jobs. And we can prove this by saying that people don't voted for Donald Trump because they were angry for not having jobs to begin with, right? We think that TAA is ineffective. There's no other way of redistribution unless they're giving them more jobs. So we think that we're going to, now that we've read all the points coming from the previous speaker, we want to move on to our final argument. Our third argument is that the TPP removes our ability to protect important local industries. We have three levels of analysis. Firstly, the TPP eliminates protectionist economic policies, including state subsidies and tax breaks to local companies that require government support in order to provide important goods to the people. The U.S. public budget pumps as much as $20 billion a year to agriculture industry to compensate American farmers for their low incomes so that they can continue supplying necessary crops and staple commodities to American society. Without providing stimulus to their local industries, the flow of supply of necessary goods will be diminished and we will be unable to cater the consumption demands of the market. According to Scientific American Journal, state subsidies were responsible for increasing the cropland for crop production by more than 13 million acres from 2006 to 2011 to cater to our increasing population. Secondly, certain local industries such as the energy industry require state protectionism in order to provide necessary services at affordable prices. And in this case, the U.S. subsidizes its energy industry to push down the prices for consumers below market level to ensure maximum productivity for society and optimal access to a necessary commodity. In 2008, the U.S. government funded $16.6 billion in the form of tax breaks, subsidies, and loans to various energy companies in order to keep the energy prices low during the financial crisis. But not only that, the state uses a protectionist policy to require energy companies to produce energy in a more environmentally friendly manner to qualify for subsidies and tax breaks. According to the U.S. Energy Administration, the government spent $6 billion in 2010 as subsidies for energy companies that use a special blend of ethanol and gasoline that maximizes energy efficiency. And thirdly and finally, the state should have the ability to protect and stimulate the infant industries that are crucial to future economic growth. Technology innovation, medical innovation, clean renewable energy, and space industry, among others, are heavily reliant on the state economic protectionism in order to sustain itself in the present. The nature of these infant industries is one where they have to execute risky, expensive, long-term ventures for great social good, but their sole short-term survivability is under economic threat. Without active economic preference from the states, we are killing off a potential cash cow for the nation as innovation is a frontier for economic growth in the 21st century. According to World Intellectual Property Organization, the average annual growth of nations during the Industrial Revolution is 1.1%, whilst the average annual growth of a nation in the 21st century was 2.08% due to the increase of innovations. And because we have a much better, bigger pie and more jobs, we take this debate home. Thank you.
Right, take the previous, elected by the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, respond.
May I begin? Mr. Madam Speaker, in today's debate, we're going to prove to you two things. First, we're going to prove to you that the economy is simply going to be worse under said government, but second of all, we're going to tell you also that redistribution that they seem to aim for in today's debate is simply worse held out under their set of house. But with that, we want to move on to rebuttals first and delegitimize government's arguments in the first place. Firstly, Mr. Speaker, they tell you that jobs will be created as a result of dropping out of TPP. Firstly, Mr. Speaker, we think that because we told you that the government does have an incentive to redistribute wealth earned by the FTA, as we explained to you in the second argument, we think that when the USA government has plans to extend unemployment benefits and create programs for the poor in the first place, when the TPP states those plans will be kept in the first place, which means that USA citizens are still capable of getting jobs, which means that the opposition also has a benefit at the end of the day, which I'm going to further prove through further rebuttals. But thirdly, Mr. Speaker, we think that the problem with the government's policy is that low trade means that the domestic companies are ultimately harmed at the end of the day, because we think that when the price of USA products are going up due to supply chains, Mr. Speaker, we think that when domestic firms that trade with export companies are also harmed and companies cannot compete adequately with other countries, we think that is a harm in and of itself. Because, Mr. Speaker, we think that the fact the price doesn't matter, it's an assumption to begin with. Because, Mr. Speaker, we think the price is a factor that matters. If US products become more expensive as we use domestic workers, we think that means that the general profit of companies decrease at the end of the day. This is because people are less willing to buy products that are expensive. We think that even if US products compete with quality and whatnot, we think that it is undeniable that the price of a product influences the choice of consumers, as seen by the rise of Xiaomi in China, for example. As already reported, Mr. Speaker, that will also even lead to less we also think that this will even lead to less redistribution from side government, as I'm going to further prove to in further rebuttals. Now, let's tackle their argument about unequal wealth distribution in the status quo. Firstly, we already told you that the lack of redistribution is a characteristic of capitalism itself and is not the harm of trade agreements to begin with. That is why governments try to implement redistribution agendas in the first place, and if the TAA is ineffective, that's simply time to adopt another policy to help poor people in the first place. But second of all, we think that even if distribution is unequal to a certain extent in the status quo, we tell you that because corporate income tax is the second biggest revenue source for the US federal government, and US corporate income tax was $273 billion in 2013 and $320 billion in 2014, this means that even if redistribution is not happening under the status quo, it will happen even less under side government, because the government has less funds to use for welfare, because companies cannot function due to high prices, and companies are unable to compete in the market as a result of their kind of policy. But thirdly, Mr. Speaker, we tell you that under side government, because the general price of goods increase, that means all their benefits are ultimately cancelled out at the end of the day. Because the unique benefit that they seem to think they have is that they help the poor. But we think that when people have difficulties getting everyday items and supplies under side government because the prices of goods increase in the first place, we don't think that the poor will necessarily benefit in the first place, Mr. Speaker. And with that, Mr. Speaker, we want to also rebut to the third argument in its entirety. Firstly, they tell you that the investor-state dispute clause exists in the status quo. Firstly, we tell that the US already does not have much power over the freedom of corporations in the first place, which means that these kind of benefits are not exclusive because the US already does not have much power over the will of corporations in the first place. But second of all, they tell you that if you're in the TPP, you can't subsidize your own agricultural industries and exportable goods and whatnot. But we think that because developing countries are the ones who actually need to provide subsidies and to their own industries, it's not the United States of America, since the fields are already advanced. We think that because the US is already competitive in the market and the fields are already strong, they are not the ones that need subsidies at the end of the day. But we think that the protection of infant industries is also created to ensure that you can go on to the next stage of development in the first place, Madam Speaker, like high-tech industries. The reason why the US doesn't need this protection in the status quo is because they already have high-tech industries. We don't need as much protection as side government characterizes in the first place. But second of all, Mr. Speaker, we tell you that we can't subsidize necessary services if you're in the TPP. Madam Speaker, we tell you that the FTA doesn't prevent the state from subsidizing their own people because the reason for that main ban in the first place is because they want to prevent companies from overly competing against other industries. We think that FTA is mainly existing to prevent unfair competition that exists in the case of necessary services. And we think that is why subsidizing to some extent is still possible, and we don't think that as a harm that is necessarily occurring under our side of the House, Madam Speaker. With that, let's move on to our last argument in today's debate about the loss of American influence and how that is harmful to society, Madam Speaker. We told that by the US withdrawing from the TPP, two things will happen. Firstly, the TPP does not now follow US labor, trade, and environmental standards. Within part of the TPP agreement is that all nations will change its trade, labor, and environmental regulations to create standardized rules which all TPP countries should follow at the end of the day. We think that these regulations included minimum wage, safe working conditions, environmental protection, and employee benefits. We think that as a leader of the TPP, the US would have imposed those regulations on other countries in the TPP. But second of all, we think that TPP nations will need to find another major economy to trade with as a result of US withdrawal from TPP. They will need to find another export nation to replace the products that the US currently provides, such as electronics, energy, mineral resources, and medical equipment. We think that this probably means that they will turn to China, who is the world's largest manufacturer and exporter of cheap goods. The US is effectively allowing China to spread its influence in the global economy, and we think that there are several harms to this. Firstly, we tell you that China is known to commit various infringements on labor rights and environmental destruction. The Economist reported recently the Chinese government came under fire after 21 employees at the Foxconn manufacturing plant have killed themselves since 2010 because of terrible working conditions. Within the Bloomberg also reports that China has now become the world's largest polluter, especially because of its heavy dependency on coal. In contrast, Mr. Madam Speaker, the U.S. has various laws that will improve labor conditions in the TPP. The BBC reports that the U.S. would introduce minimum wage laws and safe working conditions. We think that this will be very beneficial for laborers in the TPP, especially those in developing nations like Vietnam and Malaysia, who have had very bad working conditions. We think that by withdrawing, the U.S. can no longer improve the lives of these individuals. But lastly, Madam Speaker, we would prefer to trade with the U.S. because the U.S. is, on a comparative, far more accountable than China is. Because the U.S. is a democracy which practices the rule of law. According to the TPP, other nations can sue U.S. companies if they break contracts or conduct criminal negligence. The Alien Tort Statute is American law which allows foreign nationals to sue American companies if they have done something wrong. In contrast, China is known to be a country which protects its business interests and ignore the rule of law. China recently ignored a ruling by the International Court of Justice regarding the South China Sea dispute with the Philippines. And since they have also broken numerous laws, for all these reasons, we are very proud to oppose. Thank you.
Right, and thank the previous speaker. We'd like to invite the government with.
Mr. Madam Speaker, firstly, before I move on directly to the rebuttal of the previous speaker's last argument, let me clarify to you what we believe are the main issues in today's debate. We believe, Mr. Speaker, the first issue is who better protects the American citizens within the American society. Second clash regarding the idea, is this really beneficial or harmful for the United States economy, right? Having clarified those two issues, I'll move on directly to the rebuttal of the previous speaker's third argument. So they basically talked about how there's going to be a loss of American influence because now China gets stronger, right? First of all, Mr. Madam Speaker, we believe that the fact that we don't believe that U.S. actually has more responsibility to change like these labor conditions and preserve these kind of environmental standards in developing countries compared to all of the lives of American workers in the first place. So we believe that that itself should not be a priority of the government in the first place. But second, we believe that that should be actually up to the United Nations or other kind of global institutions to solve for like these kind of labor standards and environmental standards in the first place. Third of all, Mr. Speaker, we also believe that China is actually changing. We think that China is upon its progressive trend into making sure that it's actually keeping up with the environment as well. So we don't think it is as severe as they characterized as before. So therefore, having clarified that, let me move on directly to the first clash regarding the idea of who is actually beneficial for these American citizens, right? We believe that both teams do not have a mutually exclusive goal in today's debate. Both teams want to uniquely benefit the citizens' lives and try to provide jobs, right? Therefore, it becomes a debate of who best provides this kind of job opportunities. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, we will win this clash by proving to you that the inherent characteristics of the TPP actually exacerbates the social inequality that is exclusive within America's situation and therefore increase mass job unemployment. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, even if they can prove to us like some of the minimal benefits, like an increase of GDP, if we can prove to you that there is going to be a major economic trade-off in which the burdens of like the economic harms are being upon the shoulders of the working class and those people who actually need help in today's debate, therefore we win this clash home. First of all, they talked about how redistribution occurs for people anyways, and how when the pie gets bigger, then also the life and the quality gets bigger, right? They also said it's beneficial for the service industry, and this is going to be beneficial for the American citizens in the first place, right? First of all, Mr. Madam Speaker, let me tell you that we think that their case is simply based upon idealistic benefits of FTA and TPP that never actually worked for 20 and 30 years, right? No, thank you, ma'am. We told you, Mr. Madam Speaker, that FTA always fooled us with these kind of empty promises that team opposition had given us in the first place. Second, we think it's practically improbable that agricultural farmers who lose their business suddenly have all the prerequisites to participate with the service industries or also to participate in all of these high-tech jobs in the first place. So we deny all of that kind of characterization. But third of all, Mr. Madam Speaker, we'd like to tell you that participating within service industry is actually actually not of a marginal benefit compared to working in the agriculture industries in the first place. We think their actually wages are comparatively lower. And second, we believe that actually there's much more benefits for these workers to sustain their jobs within the agricultural industries and local industries. Third of all, Mr. Speaker, we'd like to tell you the service industries actually do not account for the major component of the U.S. economy, meaning that even though these people might increase jobs within the service industry, that is not actually beneficial. But fourth of all, we don't think that the idea of the benefit of service industries is exclusive to TPP. We think that because service industry is not actually related to the idea of getting rid of tariffs in the first place, their benefit does not stand in today's debate. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, even if we agree within the best case scenario that redistribution works, we think upon a comparative level, our model is much more direct because we make sure that people do not lose their job in the first place, and second, because their policies a trickle-down effect, we think that that is simply dependent upon the fact of government efficiency, and therefore, Mr. Speaker, we think that that is a less dependable policy when it comes to saving these lives of these American workers in the first place. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, we prove to you that because America is the major stakeholder in today's debate, we think that other countries are not as important. We think that the priority should be within the United States perspective, and because we clearly proved to you that there is much more loss of jobs within our policy, we take the first caution. Moving on before we move on directly to the second question, let me also tell you what they said was about the idea of the TAA, in which they give this kind of money or as an insurance, right? First of all, Mr. Madam Speaker, about that idea, they never clarified to us, are they going to give insurance for these workers for their entire life? Are they going to give it for 6 months or 1 year? We don't think that there was any clarifications or any kind of benefits that they proposed in the first place. But second, by bringing up the idea of TAA, we think that they concede to an extent that when we talk about jobs being lost, they also concede to the fact that jobs are going to be lost, and therefore there is an exclusive harm that is existing within the idea of TPP. So having clarified that, let me go on directly to the second clause regarding the idea of comparing these kind of benefits and harms with the U.S. economy, right? So they told us how companies now have a benefit because they can also sell at a cheaper price, and second, because of the removal of these kind of trade barriers, they're going to get these kind of economic benefits, and the price of the product goes down, so it's actually good for the consumers. First of all, Mr. Madam Speaker, we think that they're actually exaggerating all of these benefits because the idea of setting up factories within America is not as expensive as it was before. We think that actually labor costs in the United States aren't as expensive as we can see, for example, in Hyundai. They actually set up 3 factories, and also a lot of companies also set up many factories within American society as well. So we deny that kind of characterization. But second, Mr. Speaker, even if we agree that there is an economic benefit, we told you that they cannot always account for the losses of the lives that are happening right now and the sacrifice of the individuals that we are doing with the TPP. Third of all, Mr. Speaker, we also like to say that the United States significantly suffers because they possess less negotiation power, because when it comes to reaching a unilateral consensus within the TPP, that is so much harder compared to simply bilateral agreements, right? And therefore, Mr. Madam Speaker, we don't think that America at the end actually has an economic advantage as they have told us before, and rather it is better for the expansion of the United States economy to protect itself, protect its infant industries, and because many sectors did not develop yet, we need much more innovation within the American growth as well. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, because we believe that that itself is an exclusive benefit that we provided to you, and because we clearly proved to you that they never engaged upon our points of how redistribution never actually worked, how it was going to only not solve the problem of these workers in the long term, that is why I'm more than proud to close. Thank you.
Right, so to see this, I'd like to recognize the opposition leader.
Mr. and Madam Speakers, we think it's extremely stupid for side government to want redistribution by harming your own economy, by actually harming yourself. We think if redistribution's such a big problem, we think that these citizens should actually make other policies to actually ensure redistribution at the end of the day. The government's argument about redistribution, it's a harm of the idea of capitalism, not the harm of TPP, not a harm TPP actually brought to you. That's why, Madam Speaker, Mr. and Madam Speakers, we will clearly prove to you under my speech how at the end of the day, not only does side opposition benefit the economy, we will also be able to benefit redistribution and these individual citizens, as the whip speaker of the other side has told you. So let us actually prove to you why that actually happens. So our first clash is basically about whether which team helps the economy or benefits the economy, and our second clash is about whether which team gives better redistribution at the end of the day. So, Mr. and Madam Speakers, government actually claims to you that it's a very economic harm because job is actually taken. Well, Mr. and Madam Speakers, we think that that's, on the other hand, a harm towards government side. Why? Because we think that what government is basically doing is every single car that the United States, like, corporation wants to make should be made in the States. We think there are two disadvantages when this actually happens. First of all, the labor cost is, even if it might be minute, in which we first of all do not agree in the first place, which is the, like, differences between Chinese labor costs and this labor cost is indeed clearly huge for you, Mr. and Madam Speaker. That's why this in itself gives a lot of advantage for Chinese Xiaomi or whatnot, as our speakers clearly told you. But secondly, Mr. and Madam Speaker, this is completely denying the idea of competitive advantage under the idea of FTA, right? The idea that you actually focus upon what you are really benefited at, and they focus on what you are really benefited at, and these two actually adding to you to have a cheap product. We think that benefit's only beneficial under TPP, not under government side. So what basically happens under government side is your products being extremely expensive, right? What happens there? Well, first of all, Mr. and Madam Speaker, your own industries cannot compete against other corporations which actually had other FTAs, such as Xiaomi, right? That's when Apple cannot no longer compete with Xiaomi in terms of prices or whatnot. That's the exact reason why government completely denies the economy, because these industries will fall down because they can simply not compete in terms of prices, right? That's the exact reason why, Mr. and Madam Speaker, we think that government clearly denies the economy by actually denying these individual industries' rights, or actually not allowing these industries to survive at the end of the day. Then, Mr. and Madam Speaker, why is this a harm to jobs at the end of the day? Once these individual corporations actually lose their jobs and lose their competitiveness, they of course have to fire their citizens in the first place. They have to lower the cost, they have to lower the wages given to these individuals. That itself is a clear harm to these individuals. But not only that, in the worst case scenario, when these corporations start to fall down and crumble down, we think that that's an even further harm for these individuals, and we think that that's when even more jobs are taken. On the other hand, ladies and gentlemen, why can opposition provide you a system with both economic benefits as well as jobs at the end of the day? First of all, Mr. and Madam Speaker, we clearly told you how government does not have the benefit of taxation, which, like Leonard told you, their deputy speaker told you about how there's so much people, because we've clearly told you that these people will be fired from their jobs and these people will not get the wages they should have. But secondly, Mr. and Madam Speaker, on the other hand, we think that by having more welfare, by actually taxing these industries even more, we have better redistribution, we have better welfare that actually happens to you. That's when more jobs are created, more industries are created, more SMEs are created. Also, further on, Mr. and Madam Speaker, why do we believe that the transition is easier when the economy is better? Because there is more spending power under the US economy. This means there is more money going around, more investments that is actually going to the US. This means more SMEs, more infant industries actually being allowed to appear under side opposition, not side government. That's why they're also their promised benefit of economy getting harmed or jobs actually being taken. That's not a benefit towards their side. It wasn't actually clash that actually benefited our side at the end of the day, because we created more jobs, we created more benefits towards the economy. We benefited both Apple as well as these individual farmers, agriculture people at the end of the day. Now, Mr. and Madam Speaker, let us actually go to our second clash about whether which team gives better redistribution at the end of the day. As I've all told you in my introduction, we think it's very stupid for the government to try to harm the economy to this extent simply because they want better redistribution, right? We think that then to do we think that it's not the TPP's individual harm of redistribution. If the citizens wants to actually be to want better redistribution was problem, we think that that was actually happening for you, Mr. and Madam Speaker. For example, Hillary Clinton's stance in the politics was basically that I will not destroy TPP, but I will actually give better redistribution to you at the end of the day. What actually happened is citizens actually voted more for Hillary Clinton. We deny that Trump was an actually popular leader. We think that he was simply there because of all these states, I don't know what, electoral college policy at the end of the day. That's why, Mr. and Madam Speaker, under the concession that these individual citizens have so much wants to be redistributed, we think that these politicians clearly do know that this is a true fact. Therefore, Mr. and Madam Speaker, we think that this will happen to you as well as upon opposition side, because these politicians are clearly aware of the fact that that's what these citizens want at the end of the day. Mr. and Madam Speaker, at the last point about the labor costs, what actually happens for these individual citizens within the, under the government side, we think that now, because they have to compete in terms of, prices compared to, all the other, Xiaomi or whatnot, they also have to decrease the labor costs of these individuals. They also have to decrease the amount of money that is actually gone like going to these individual American like citizens, American workers at the end of the day. So that's why, Mr. and Madam Speaker, we think government's policy is also harming these individual people's rights, the people at the bottom of the society who should actually receive like basic amount of minimum wage, but they can't actually get that benefit because that rate of minimum wages keep going down and down before they have to actually compete. Madam Speakers and Mr. Speakers, because I've clearly proved to you how it is upon side opposition to actually protect the economy, not side government, which actually harms it even more, because they forgot the fact about competitive advantage or labor cost, because we've told you redistribution also happens upon side opposition, we have no reason to go with Trump and actually say no to TPP. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Regis. To close the case of the opposition side, opposition reply.
Can I start? Honorable Chair, today's side government comes out and accuses side opposition for exaggerating the benefit of FTA, exaggerating the benefit of TPP. But we say, we already told you by lots of statistics about the benefit of having TPP and about that it is actually having the 40% of the whole economy. We think that on the other hand, side government are the ones who are exaggerating the problem. Side government are the ones who are failing to see the long-term benefit of having free trade in the first place. Now, for instance, like American exports are actually supporting a number of American jobs in their workplaces. For instance, like American jobs are supporting 11.7 million jobs in the status quo. We say that that is solely done by American exports. So therefore, with all those kind of trade barriers, all those kinds of tax and tariffs, they are still making 11.7 million jobs in the status quo. Without those kinds of barriers, we say that more jobs can be created. We say that it can benefit the citizens in the end. Now, in this motion, there were lots of issues, but I'm not going to deal with every issue. I'm going to divide it up to two main points. First of all, about the country, and secondly, about the citizen. Now, basically, first issue was about the country, which team can benefit the U.S. economy better. And we think that that is the most important clash, because in fact, like citizens are inside the country. If country develops, then we see that inevitably, even if like they failed to redistribute, the basic level of life actually goes up. That's the reason why you see that basically country is important. And if actually country collapse, if actually the country cannot compete inside the global society, we say that benefit directly goes to the citizens. We should look in the long term. Now that's the reason why I say that it is the most important clash in this debate. It is the most important question in the first place. Now, under this question, what did we tell you? We told you about how U.S. can gain significant benefit from exports, and how like they failed to acknowledge the how big and the size of the TPP, because we already told you about how it is related with like 12 nations and about the 40% of economy, and we also told you about the intellectual property right and about the supply chain, how it can benefit the U.S. in lots of and diverse terms. But secondly, they said that discussed about how like we cannot subsidize those kind of like infant industries. Therefore, it is harmful to our nation. But we said that already we can support those kind of support those kinds of industries, but like overly supporting, therefore making an unfair competition. We said that that is a negative thing that we are trying to prevent by TPP. Now, therefore, we told you that country can certainly benefit, but about the citizen also, because government like them so much. Now, first of all, about the policy of redistribution, we told, and they said that the only logic from them was it cannot be done. It has not been done throughout the history. But first of all, we see that perfect redistribution cannot be done in the first place in a capitalist society. Like expecting for a perfect redistribution is actually ineffective as actually a goal that we cannot achieve in the first place. But secondly, furthermore, we tell you that because it has not been done throughout the status quo, it doesn't mean that we just need to give up like thousands of dollars for U.S. economy to thrive. We think that we can make policies like TAA, and there are lots of policies that can be created further. We think that that is not a rebuttal for like how policy of redistribution is not done. But furthermore, we told you about how it can increase the overall life of citizens, overall benefit for the citizens because of jobs, that as the example we provided, but furthermore in long term because we can provide welfare redistribution and those people the job training and so on. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Regis. To close this debate, government reply.
previous speaker told you in 3 minutes why economy is the biggest factor in this debate today. We deny that premise because we clearly told you in our very good-looking second speaker that just because the GDP of the United States increased by 2%, the household real income decreased by 1%. So even if the economy increases, the actual quality of life, like they assume, does not actually increase because the household GDP decreases for individuals. And that's the most important thing we're trying to state in this debate today. Even if the economy increases, if it's not redistributed properly, we take this debate home because we have to provide everybody with equal economic opportunities, and that's the goal of both teams in the end of today's debate. Also, first of all, we told you, and even if we assume that economy is the most important part, we told you also in our second speaker that budget and etc. is actually more collected in our case, right? Because we told you that exclusivity of people paying direct taxes are different from corporate income tax, which are also susceptible to things like tax evasion or whatsoever. So we told you we actually have more government budget, which they did not engage to. But additionally, we told you benefits like things like negotiation power, which also increase the economy of certain countries. Also, let's look at every single benefit they told you in this debate today. Firstly, supply chain. Secondly, lower price. Thirdly, bigger pie or whatsoever, and this bigger economy. Mr. Speaker, first of all, we don't think that this is not mutually exclusive in this debate to begin with, right? Our second speaker and third speaker clearly told you in this debate today that all of these benefits are contingent upon the fact that our lower labor costs and are dependent on the fact that there are lower labor costs. We clearly told you that there are incentives for people to move factories into the United States because this is simply not true. Just like Honda, Hyundai, and Nissan, right? As long as they do not rebut to this point, and labor costs are not as effective, we believe that all the benefits that they claim are existent in our case because we clearly told you and persuaded you and told you that there are lower labor costs even in the United States, right? So their economic benefits are not actually big of a deal in this debate today. Additionally, let's move on to the other issue, which is upon the argument of redistribution, which was, like we told you, the most important part of today's debate. What is their primary source of redistribution? First of all, they're trying to provide jobs with the supply chain, which we completely negated, right? Because we told you supply chain creates jobs under their logic for service industries, but we also told you the service industries do not have anything to do with tariffs in the first place, so we believe that those jobs are not actually created, right? But additionally, we told you that service industries are very low paying to begin with, and the number of jobs compared to the number of manufacturing jobs that under our case that we completely secure is different, right? We told you that exclusivity of manufacturing jobs and in comparison to the service industry, so we believe that under our case we provide much more secure jobs to begin with. Additionally, what was their other form of redistribution? Things like TAA or whatsoever, which we already told you is ineffective, because despite the fact that they spent so much money on TAA, they were still not able to get rid of people's anger so that they vote for Donald Trump, right? We think the phenomena itself that they voted for Donald Trump means that people are angry because they don't have jobs, and TAA wasn't enough to actually provide education for people to get better jobs, and etc. So we believe that redistribution is not actually under their case. But why is redistribution under our case, Mr. and Madam Speaker? We clearly told you that we have secure jobs, and we told you the exclusivity of manufacturing jobs, right? And we also told you about companies will start moving their factories inside the United States, which will again provide more jobs for the people. All the benefits also do not stand if people do not have jobs to begin with, right? If there's a lower price of things, if people don't have capital to begin with because they don't have jobs, they can't even afford the lower price of things, right? So we believe that having jobs is the most important, and as only our team provides to you the most secure and most number of jobs, we take this debate home. Thank you.
Right, thank you, previous and everyone across the house. Shake hands and good luck with the results.